So welcome. It's kind of exciting to see you all here. I really wasn't sure how this would go because this is our first serious start here for the first session. So it's very cool to have you all here. And the reason you don't have a full dinner is because we have a very busy night. So you get to nibble and drink water, and that's about it. Because you're gonna be listening to a lot and doing a little bit of work. I want to introduce Dan Smith, who's the president of ThinkWise, who is in effect going to facilitate this dialogue around personality and interpersonal and intrapersonal communications, which are going to be important to putting together the teams, which are then going to be important to how you process and how you work together for your assignment, which I will give you tonight, and then email back to all of you so that you have both that, a copy of what Dan's going to talk about, and we move forward. So it's really nice to see everybody here. This is going to be fun, and just I say this entirely to make you feel good, but I'm sure I'm saying this to make myself feel good too. I've had probably a half a dozen people say to me, "I understand what you're working on. I've heard about this. Can I do that? Can I get involved? Can I do that?" Saying no. It's closed, It's a very special group right now. David Rosen will probably stop in somewhere around 6 or so, say hi, and then go back out. He's between things that happen at year end of a school and all that sort of good stuff. So unless there are any major burning questions that anybody has, pause. Oh. Then please meet Dan Smith, who will sort of take it from there.
Thanks, John. So, welcome everybody. I've been really excited. We've been planning this for a few weeks, and number one, I appreciate everyone taking the time to either report their Myers-Briggs type or taking it online. I'm curious, was the process of taking the assessment, getting your results, scale of 1 to 10, was that 10 really fun and interesting, 1 kind of a drag, and don't know why we're doing it? How did people find the process? All right. How many people here had previously taken the Myers-Briggs and kind of knew their type? So a good chunk of you. So for some of you who are familiar with your type and have gone through this before, hopefully it was long enough ago that some of the material will be interesting and refreshed as you learn about other types especially. Maybe you held on to what your type meant. But I just love this stuff. So what ThinkWise does is a lot of leadership development type work. We work with organizations on their learning management system and stuff like that. But this is the kind of work that I really enjoy doing because it just gets at the root of what makes people tick. And I find that fascinating. Just by way of background, just so you understand where I'm coming from, I am not a psychologist. I'm just a business guy. But I'm a business guy that got into ThinkWise about 8 years ago and really started to, at that point, and I'll tell you later on what my type is, but at that point I did people stuff based on gut instinct. If I was going to hire somebody, I'd take them out for dinner and a couple of beers, and I'd make a decision based on how we got along. But I don't know how many of you are involved in hiring people, but taking the hiring over a beer or a glass of wine might work most of the time, but some of the times it can be a disaster. So I started learning the science, if you will, the psychology behind how you start figuring out what type of people you need on your team and how you can actually use instruments like the Myers-Briggs and other instruments that are out there to make better decisions about building teams. And I'm a huge fan of it now, and it's what our organization does, and I'm hoping that this might be the start of you really kind of internalizing, not only interacting with others and what type and communication and how that's impacted, but frankly, starting to use what most of you in here probably are designers or involved with design in some way, starting to think about how you use personality and type and those dynamics to actually design teams where you work. So we'll go through essentially a process where we're gonna walk through what the different types are, the dichotomies or the preferences, and we'll hopefully have some dialogue along the way. And then really the crux of what John and I wanted to really push on with this group is really to start thinking about how type might be acknowledged, leveraged, and used in a design, in a mindful, design-oriented way as you move forward in designing the program, and making this thing real. So, any quick questions before we dive in terms of how the night's going to go and expectations? No? All right. Well, let's dive in. And by the way, I'm one of those guys that's like really jealous about this program, and I told John this story. I'll tell you a small story. Growing up in Boise, Idaho, I took a lot of, it started with drafting and then started getting in, and I did a lot of fine art type of stuff as a young kid. Your parents take you to painting, and you do ceramics and all this kind of stuff. But I was kind of an artsy kind of kid. Loved drawing. Actually got into self-study around doing drawings of buildings. I thought I was going to be an architect. Frank Lloyd Wright was my hero. I'd go to the library. And then, and this is, maybe you guys are involved in this, and maybe you can watch out for it, but we did part of that self-study was going to interview an architect. And I picked my best friend's buddy who was an architect. And I don't know if I picked him on a bad day or a bad part of his career, but I distinctly remember as a junior in high school him telling me that I would be poor, or I'd be frustrated. I'd probably work for a big firm and end up designing HVAC systems and vestibules for shopping malls, and said you're never gonna, the number of people that get to design really cool stuff is like minimal, and bottom line is I became a CPA. So I'm a frustrated designer in some ways. So here we go. So be careful how honest you are when you're doing the interviews with kids that are coming through and wanting to know what to do with their life. MBTI stands for Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's just a fancy word of saying what's your personality using the Myers-Briggs. It'll give you an idea of, we'll give you an idea of what the instrument is, and it was obviously a self-assessment. The first thing we're really going to have to do here is really explore it, because the whole foundational aspect of the Myers-Briggs is you know yourself better than anybody else. And I think one or two of you actually sent a message saying, I changed one of my types, one of my dimensions, and that's perfectly acceptable. Approximately 20 to 25% of people that take the Myers-Briggs change one of their 4 dimensions to something they feel that, they understand themselves, and even though the instrument said they're an extrovert, they really know that they're an introvert. That's how they really get their energy. So if you, as you go through this, if you really start to feel that one of them is off, that's normal, and you should entertain it. And then, of course, probably the more interesting aspect of it after we go through it is we're going to explore what it looks like between different, between individuals, between teams, and ultimately organizations. And some of this, bear with me, hopefully this is intuitive. It's really fun to kind of put ourselves into a box and then think, ooh, I'm in the coolest box out of the grid of 16. There is no good or bad type. There is no type that is more predictive of CEOs or successful people or people who have good relationships and bad relationships. It's just type. So we're going to talk about what that means and the natural strengths and blind spots of that. Again, we'll look at it in terms of teamwork, communication, decision making. People ever heard of this guy? It's Carl Jung, not Jung. you know, I'm not a psychologist. I think the guy was a bit crazy. But he came up with a fantastic framework for looking at how people are wired. I just found that quote and think it's funny. I think it's pretty true as well, that everything that irritates us can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's especially true over the last 18 years with me raising 3 kids. He believes, and there's some challenges to this, but I think most people that I've done this session with and that have gone through some type of personality type of instrument, he believed that it's inborn. It is, you are who you are when you're born. There's something going on in the brain that's wiring people to be disposed to be a certain type. They use the example of left-handed and right-handed. We're born one way. Can we, do we use both? Of course. And we use both extroverted and introverted behaviors. But they all, Jung says, and the Myers-Briggs instrument believes that we are wired to be more comfortable doing one thing. I'm more comfortable right-handed. Now that doesn't mean that where we were born, our education, our family, our environment, of course it impacts it and influences it, but that it's inborn. This is really just talking about the fact that it can be strengthened by use. But I've found plenty of people. I'll give you a great example. I have a family of 3 kids, and my wife and I. I'm quite extroverted. She's quite extroverted. My firstborn daughter is extroverted, and my youngest boy is extroverted. My poor middle child is the only introvert in a house of extroverts. Now, when you talk to people and tell them, people at my work and stuff like that who know my kids and some friends, they would never predict that my middle son, Dare, is introverted. But that's because he's grown up in a family of extroverts. He has some behaviors that look very extroverted. But the question is, where does he recharge his batteries? And a perfect example of this is my family would be sitting around the TV. We'd be watching something very social, like my daughter's big into singing, and we'd watch American Idol. All of us are up there and kind of chatting about it and, sometimes making fun, right, of the tryouts that are crazy. And we'd be going on, and all of a sudden we'd turn around, and my middle son, Dare, has escaped. And he's gone downstairs. And he's watching TV by himself or reading a book. That's how he recharges. Whereas the other people in the family get their energy from being around people. So one little real-life example is you start to think through how these preferences start to manifest themselves in your family and such. And again, hopefully this is obvious. There is no correlation between how mature you are, your emotions, your IQ, intelligence, stress, trauma, emotional health. It doesn't map to that. So we want to make sure that we don't start to attach any additional weight to the preference. And by the way, we don't use personality instruments as such to try to hire people. So the CPP folks who publish the Myers-Briggs are adamantly against their instrument being used as part of a hiring process, because it starts to go at what we were just looking at that slide in terms of trying to judge people. Other personality instruments, including one that we've developed, are used all the time to try to help understand where people are most likely going to have strengths. So it is used, but the Myers-Briggs won't be used. All right, E and I. Let's dive into this. Extroverted versus introverted. Extroversion, this is probably one that's most intuitive and in terminology that's used in our world. Extroversion focus their energy and attention outward. They're interested in the world of people and everything around them. introverted are a bit more obviously inward focused, interested in the inner world of thoughts and reflections. I really use, in terms of if you want to really start asking yourself, people who are extroverted get energy by being around other people. So if they're tired, they have a long day at work, and there's an opportunity to go out with friends or go to a party or go to a gathering, when they go, they get more energized. That's where they get their energy. Of course, I mean, we all get worn out from just activity, but mentally, that's what energizes them. For an introvert, going to functions like that takes a lot of energy from them. They have to kind of take a big breath and go into that. Now, it doesn't mean you can just look at somebody and tell if they're an introvert or an extrovert all the time, because there's some introverts that appear very extroverted because they've learned that works for them. Like my son, he's grown up in an extroverted family. But when they want to recharge their batteries, introverts tend to want to be in smaller groups or by themselves. Does that make sense? And bear with me, the first part of this is I'm plowing through some of this stuff. We'll get some more dialogue going as we move forward. And again, extroverted, outer world, very aware of what's going on around them. There's some obvious ones on here. Tend to speak out easily and often and too much at meetings. May not be as aware of what's going on inside of themselves. Introversion, again, inner world, inner reactions, prefer to interact with people they know, often reserved and harder to get to know, may not be aware of the outer world around them. Now again, it doesn't mean that this is exclusionary. We use all of our preferences, and everybody who's an extrovert can have some of this. Everybody who's an introvert can have some of what's on the prior slide. And then again, just some key words to kind of let you chew on in terms of what describes extroversion versus introversion. Have any of you, as you think about it, have any of you known, think of people that you have relationships with, or children, parents, coworkers? Can you give me an example of someone who plays in both sides of this? You got one? Yeah?
Yeah. Nobody would guess I'm introverted, but I am.
Okay.
I'm a closet introvert.
You're a closet introvert. So how do you recharge your batteries?
Being alone, reflection, journaling.
Okay.
But I'm in front of people all the time.
And so do you consciously hide that, or people just aren't aware of the fact that you're recharging your batteries when you go off by yourself?
I don't know. Yeah, closet. That's a closet part.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's a great example. Any other examples? Maybe on the flip side? Okay. So I guess as we're thinking about this, hopefully it's obvious, but this is an opportunity essentially, whether you have your report with you or a notebook, I don't know if it's confirmatory or it starts to challenge some of your thinking, but kind of think through now whether or not this is, that you got a good feel for what extroverted versus introverted is, and where you sit. S and N. Okay, this is sensing, and the N is for intuition. Sensing folks tend to prefer to take information in. They use all their senses, and they allow things to happen and look at them and process them as they come in. They allow their sensing to take care of that information as it comes in. People who prefer intuition jump ahead. They look for the pattern. Their brain can't help it. How might that manifest itself? Give me an example of somebody that might be high in intuition. What would that look like if you were talking to them? and they keep things moving along, right? You see what I just did to John? Well, yeah, you can call it interrupting. People who are strong in intuition try to pick up on where someone's going, and they jump ahead with what I think John was going to say, and they have a tendency to finish people's sentences. And sometimes it can feel real natural, and it doesn't feel like they're all over you. But other times it can be like, dude, quit finishing my sentence. It's my thought. Let me finish it. They can't help it. They're not being rude because they want to look smarter than you. Their brain can't help themselves. It jumps ahead, predicts what's coming out of someone's mouth, predicts what's coming out in a movie. People have seen that movie where, I think it's Netflix, and the gal ruins like a movie after movie after movie because she keeps telling what about this movie? Oh, no, The Bachelor did it, or The Butler did it. Those are people that can't help themselves. Sensing people, on the other hand, they need to take in all the data. They need to take in the data before they're going to jump to a conclusion. And I want you to kind of think about how this plays out inside of teams, right? Because this is one, the extroversion-introversion one is an interesting one, and I think we're naturally, we can kind of see what happens in a group meeting, and you have introverts and extroverts, kind of, the introverts, bide their time, they wait, they take it all in, the extroverts are out in front of it, but this one can cause some really interesting tension in teams, and we'll come back to that. So sensing, they see and collect the facts, practical, realistic. They like to be linear. Start at the beginning, walk me through what the steps are, and then I want to know how to learn how to set up the tent. Walk me through it, right? One thing at a time. Intuition person, throw out everything, start slipping poles in and see what the heck happens, right? Specific and literal when speaking and writing and listening. They live in the present, dealing with the here and now. They prefer reality to fantasy. And again, I want to keep coming back to the fact that some of these things sound very matter of fact. We're trying to set the extreme of the poles of this thing. There's a lot of mix in the middle in terms of how people use these preferences. So just because you might be sensing doesn't mean that you don't enjoy, that you're not imaginative and you don't like to think about what could be. But the preference, the comfortable space is in reality. What the here and now is. What can I see, touch, smell? Intuition, on the other hand, is about patterns, possibilities, connections, more conceptual. They like to talk in metaphors and examples. And they prefer the imagination and ingenuity to reality. Some key words here to help us kind of zero in on that. And again, ultimately, getting a sense. Now, throughout this process, psychology and the Jungian types that Myers-Briggs is based on, it's not a hard science. So if you have examples in real life where you see something you don't agree with, or you have some example that doesn't play out in my head, bring it up. Challenge the thinking. All right, thinking versus feeling. This is really the way we make decisions. People who prefer thinking make their decisions objectively, logically. Now, that doesn't mean that people who have a preference for F, it doesn't mean they're illogical. It just means they're more comfortable making decisions with a very person-centered, values-based process. Their logical consideration is always to think about what a decision is going to do to the person they're interacting with or the environment. They're naturally thinking about that right off the bat. Doesn't mean they don't go back and rely on logical arguments, value-based arguments, economically, economic-based arguments, and vice versa. It doesn't mean people who are strong in T don't have the ability to look at the world through how their decisions and how they react to the world has an impact on people. Thinking, logic, good at analyzing situations, focus on problems and tasks, not on relationships. May not include the impacts on people or people's emotions when they make decisions, and vice versa feeling. Personal values to understand a situation. Focus on the values of the group. Are good at understanding people and their viewpoints. Few words to look over. And again, where are you on that spectrum? J and P. This one's a tough one to get over the nomenclature of this. So judging doesn't necessarily mean you're a judgmental person. What it means is, what is your attitude towards the external world and kind of how you orient yourself to it. People who are judging want the external world to be organized and orderly. They want to make sense out of stuff. They look at the world and they see decisions that need to be made. People who are more perceiving seek to experience the world, not organize it. Look at the world and see options that need to be explored. A good example of this is, and I'm going to lay out the extremes, so bear with me, and I'm going to want a show of hands. When you go on vacation, and you're going to go to a new place, are you the type that wants to get the hotel set, look into what the activities are, kind of figure out what you're going to do on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4? Of course, you want to schedule in some time just to hang out and relax. Or are you the type that simply goes on vacation, gets the hotel, and then wings it and figures out what you're going to do once you get down to Florida? Show of hands of people who want to organize it and get it all figured out. And those that want to just go down and wing it.
I take the proceeding to the next level with a lot of vacations, and I only plan lodging for the first half, and then leave the second half unplanned, and we have to figure it out while we're down there. And that's kind of fun. A little nerve-wracking sometimes, but
that's
kind of cool.
Are you a J or a P?
Oh, a P for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And some of that's practical, right? I mean, it's not like it doesn't make sense to take an expensive vacation, go somewhere, and not have any preconceived ideas of what you're going to do. But it gives you an idea on a practical level how people like to go through life. It can be a bit, and these are dangerous things I throw out, so take them with a grain of salt when we throw them out. But in general, people who are high in J tend to have, what do you think their houses look like? Inside.
Neat and orderly.
Pretty neat and orderly. Their preference, their preference would be, I want it
Mid-century modern. I'm
I
sorry.
want it clean. I don't want a bunch of stuff. I don't have a bunch of knickknacks. P's, on the other hand, that can be a bit scary. Now, the one thing that screws this up, what do you think? There might be someone that's a J, wants a clean house and everything like that. There's one thing that screws this up all the time. No maid?
Your mate.
Yeah. Your mate?
Made.
Kids is the other one that I was thinking of. External factors, whether you have a spouse, a mate that's absolutely out of control. Kids, I don't care if they're a J or not, they're all P's until they hit a certain age, right? There might be some weird behavior, like one of my kids is a J, and occasionally he'll take 2.5 hours and organize his desk drawers and kind of get it all nice and neat, but that's like once every 6 months. So, but this one is really interesting as well and causes a lot of tension in a team environment, let alone in the household environment. But this is an interesting one to kind of keep in mind as we dig into some of this. Judging, make the plans, follow them, like to get things settled and finished. A J is also the type of person, if they have a big time presentation, they're in front of the big client, they nail down the PowerPoint and the flow and they think it through. If they get there and the client says, I don't want a PowerPoint, I just want to talk, the J's are going to have a little bit more anxiety flowing up inside their body than a P who's like, yeah, no problem, man, we'll just talk. Again, overgeneralizing, but that's how people are wired. They want structure. They want to know what happens after they do A. They know that B is coming. Perceiving, changing situations. They like to leave things open. They like flexible. They don't like rules and limits. Don't necessarily like making a decision. Tend to think there is plenty of time to do things. Often have to rush to complete things at the last minute. What's the word that's coming to my mind for P's? Procrastinators. And I'm one of those. Again, I did the keyword thing. This won't let me go backwards. So when combined, obviously, we're coming up with one of 16 types. So here are the 16 types. This is just a nice little chart. It kind of clusters the I's right here and the E's. So this is your E and I dichotomy. And then on the outside, in order to make it work, you got your T, thinking, versus feeling in the middle, your sensing versus intuition, and then your judging versus perceiving. Now, what I think this is interesting. John and I, when we were planning this, we were really excited to have what I'd call a reasonable distribution of people so that we could kind of play around and design the teams, and maybe even cause some dissonance by putting a few people together that we knew would be wired differently, or put some team together that has too many of the same type of people. That would have required a lot of different types of Legos, but this is the group.
Presents a challenge we didn't anticipate.
So the J's, I'm really sorry that you have to deal with so many P's. All right? I think, and again, hopefully everyone's comfortable in this group. If you don't want to talk about what your type is, that's totally cool. I'm wondering if the person who's the ESFJ is here. You don't have to identify if you don't want to. That's fine. That's cool.
I'm the one next to it, and I'll be honest with you, when you said, hey, you can challenge them, I'd bump myself up to slight or right in the middle of P and J.
Okay, so you could be up here.
I think I'm, yeah.
All right, we're even more of the same. God, this group desperately needs some J's. The S, I feel sorry for again. Just sees the, they're with people, they're with all these N's. I've never seen this kind of clustering. Now I'm really interested to actually do some, work with the university and do some statistical testing on design people to see if there's something in the process that kicks all the S's out of the school of design, or there's something going on here. Maybe it's just luck. Let me, and you might be asking, well, maybe there's just a lot more P's and N's, and I know this is a little fuzzy, but let's look over here first. So if you look at the E and the I, you can see here that 49% are extroverted, 51% introverted. S and N, okay, 73%, this is all US, this is over years and years and years, 73% are S's versus 27% N's. So you guys have flipped this, flipped it on its head. T versus F, 60% F versus T, 40%. So thinking versus feeling. And then 46% on the perceiving versus 54 on the J. So this is completely unpredictive of what we just saw in about the 19 or 20 people that we have the types for, which I just think is fascinating. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. But then you can look over here and you can see that the different percentages in the US that the types represent. I think it's interesting. And then I have a couple other interesting slides here. So this you might be asking, well, what's the difference between men and women and how people are typed? And interestingly, it's not that far off. So 46% to 52 on extroversion, 54, 47. There is one up here, I don't know if you can see it, that's really different, pretty similar in the S's and the N's. It's right there. Isn't that fascinating? Does that surprise anybody?
So what is that saying? If you are a T and you're a woman, you think more like a man?
It's kind of showing.
No. What I think, what I see though, is because this is reasonable distribution. So 56% of men are T's and 43% of men are F's. But this right here there's just a lot. This is a big difference. 76% of women are F's, according to their statistics, versus T. Which I think is reasonably confirmed by, all the, what is it? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. There's some different generalizations that are made out there in terms of how people are wired. I think the Myers-Briggs does a better job of showing how people are wired in different capacities along a lot different dimensions than just throwing people into two big buckets. But I think that one's an interesting one to consider. And then between J and P, 52 versus 48, men, 52% of men are J's, 48%, and 44 versus 56%. And then there's just another visual representation of this group. So 12 versus 7, 1 versus 18, 8 and 11, and 3 and 16.
You're going to have your assignment given tonight, and in a little bit we're going to talk about self-establishing teams. It's really going to be interesting to see what happens, because my sense of this, and correct me on that, is that because you're going to be charged with developing the content for the next 6 sessions, and I have that spelled out a little more clearly for you, it would appear that's going to be hard for some groups to do. It just may be really difficult. And where I had this clever anticipation of sort of seeding things, I have no clue where this is going to go. Well, no, I want to see what's going to happen. No, it's not a bad thing. It's an unanticipated thing. So I really don't know.
Is this surprising? What I'd like to hear some feedback on what you see here in terms of the distribution.
Does it reflect design or designers, or does that play a role in it at all?
I'm sure it does at some level. I'm sure there's something about the world of patterns and possibilities and imagining new things that might be appealing in the design world for people that are wired like that. Same thing with the P versus the J. I would bet, I don't know how many of you, but show of hands are actually in design firms, creative firms of some kind. I would bet, I'd put good money on it that if you did the Myers-Briggs throughout your organization, it would not be as skewed as this. There are going to be people in your organization. How many people in the organization have somebody that you go to that is the person that gets crap done? They're on top of it. They get it done. They're the ones that kind of keep the project on task, keep things organized. Do all the firms have someone like that? Gwen, you guys don't have that person?
Well, yeah. I mean, but I don't know. There's a few of us.
Okay.
Well, I was wondering too, how does the personality type fit in with like behavioral types? Because the DISC, for example,
Yep.
I mean, I'm like a driver in DISC world, so I guess I don't know if my personality type here would say, yeah, if I'm a, intuitive P person, that usually they don't get things done, but
But you're one of these, right?
no, I'm an I.
You are not.
Yeah, I will share. I am an INTP, and I guess I don't understand exactly what it means yet. I haven't figured out
Sure.
how to use it or what it means.
Understood. Did you get the report?
Yeah.
What did you think of the report? Was it helpful? Not as much?
I mean, just like not. I didn't understand. Well, what does it mean if I work with the other types? And
Right.
I guess I don't know how to use it yet. So
Understood.
I just didn't. And I'm kind of a learner by doer. So maybe I just have to do to learn. I don't know.
Sure. That's fine. No, that's fair. It's a good question. I think most personality instruments are trying to measure similar dimensions of people. There's always some element of whether it's the DISC or the Berkman or the Myers-Briggs, it's measuring some type of introversion versus extroversion. How people process information, how people, the drive thing. I understand, you're a high D on the DISC, it sounds like. So I would have expected you to be in the extroverted side. So, interesting. Any other feedback or ideas on what you're seeing here?
One of the things I thought was helpful about the report and kind of the description as you went through the process was that it was kind of categorizing these things as or these traits as sort of muscle memory almost. Like the more you do something, the better you get at it, even if that's not your preferred side of the spectrum. And I've taken this before, but it was several years ago, and I noticed that some of those traits had started to shift on the spectrum for me. I was more in the middle, whereas before I would have been really strong.
Sure.
And I think the last time I took it with this idea that it was going to tell me who I am, or it was like going to tell me what am I supposed to do with my life. Okay. And now I used it more as a tool, like what am I good at and what am I not as good at,
Sure.
And how do I get better at the things I'm not very good at, or how do I utilize my strengths better.
Yep.
So I think rather than have this be the definitive answer as to what does this tell me about myself, I think it's more of a how do I fit who I see myself as, or how I contribute to the team, and what do I need to pay attention to as in terms of my downfalls or my strengths.
Well, I think that's perfectly said. I think we can't take one of 16 type and say we can predictably say what every person in the world is like, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of nuance for every type, and I think depending on the environment that you work in, that you're raised in, that you live in with a spouse or significant other, we're challenged to use all of these preferences all the time. I use my left hand all the time. It's just not what I'm going to go to if I have to do something intricate and hard and detailed, right? And it's the same thing. So if There's a ton of leaders out there who are introverted, and you would never think that they're introverted people. It's because they've practiced that muscle. They've used that muscle so many times because they have to. They have to lead. They have to tell the group what to do. They have to share their vision. They have to hold people accountable. But that might not necessarily be, their natural strength. Doesn't mean it's not a strength. So from a behavioral standpoint, that's a great question. What we see isn't necessarily evidence of what someone's type is. And that's why when we're doing this class and when you get certified with CPP, a big no-no is trying to predict what someone's type is. You don't know. Because the way they are on the outside could be radically different than what they're comfortable with on the inside. But I think it becomes useful. What really gets interesting here with this stuff, and we're not going to go super deep with it, but you have a first order, what you're really comfortable with, and then it goes down from there. But what gets interesting is what pops out when you get stressed out, when you get put into a corner. How do you react? And they call it, there's some materials that CPP has. It's in the grip, and that becomes interesting when you get kind of put in a corner and under pressure. A lot of times you can start to see why you react in certain ways when you get into an argument at work, an argument at home. You get stressed out, overloaded. It starts to become interesting to really start to understand how you're wired and how that might be poking out in terms of being under stress. So what I want to do now is I do want to start getting you guys up out of your seats, and we can, I don't know if these are sticky or not. Doesn't matter.
No.
Doesn't matter. We can lay them down. So what we're going to do is we're going to just get you people thinking and writing some stuff down. So let's get in groups of four. Do the best you can not to instantly, gravitate to people that you usually hang out with. I don't know how much of that is in this group. Let's get in groups of four, shift around a little bit. And
Dan, I've realized I've done one thing that I need to do is to introduce Chuck Saylor.
Of course.
Who is joining us tonight, because when ultimately you break into the teams and you have your charge, I identified that each team will have a mentor that will work with you between now and June 3rd. And so those mentors are David Rosen, Max, myself, and Chuck. He has very nicely offered to help with that. So I realized that some of you may know Chuck, some of you may not, but he's a good guy, so get to know him. And that's why he's here, so thank you for being here.
All right. So let's do our groups of four. If you need to start snacking, you can do that. Get a glass of water. First one is, what are the strengths of a team that has a lot of extroversion? And then likewise, what might be some of the blind spots or the challenges? So maybe divide the paper in half, top or bottom, left or right, it doesn't matter, and start just bullet pointing out what you think some of those might be. Just to go around, if one of you can just kind of rattle off, let's start with the strengths. What are some of the strengths that you guys found or came up with?
Many ideas they could come up with. Good at starting the conversations. They got a lot of energy. They're very vocal and passionate. They tend to take action, which lends to the liveliness and sort of that energy. And they sort of keep momentum going.
Okay, good.
We had that, there's a lot of selling going on sometimes a lot of noise and groupthink. Things can get very fast-paced, and agreements may be made more quickly without kind of really thinking carefully about the detail.
Okay.
In that, in that saying, yeah, I like that idea, and moving forward so fast.
Okay. Good. Strengths?
Humor, high energy, inspiring, charisma, collaboration, social animal.
Okay.
Everything else is kind of
Sure.
similar.
Sure.
Yeah, that they would energize one another, that there are strong communication skills, high output, high but shallow output, meaning that they don't necessarily internalize everything and process it, but they're constantly, high output. Yeah. Are we doing negatives?
No, let's not do the negatives first. What I want to pick up on is I want to kind of get a little bit more fidelity around the types. So I heard a couple of groups kind of talk about the extroverted group might come up with a lot of ideas, might be cranking things out, might be getting a lot of stuff done. Remember when we think about, so let's think about as an example an ESTJ. So they're extroverted, but they're sensing. They want to see the world come at them, and they'll process the data as it comes in. They're logical in their thinking, the T, right? And the J is they like order. If I put a bunch of ESTJs in the room, that is not going to be a good brainstorming group. It won't be. Now they're energized, but they're going to be looking around the room saying, I need the idea, and then I'll grab it and I'll put a plan together and I'm going to drive it home and I'm going to be logical. But they're not going to come up with 50 ideas if it was a room full of what are some of the other letters in the four preferences that are going to be driving pure idea generation. It's not the E and the I necessarily. It's going to be intuition. And the P of people that just want to kind of let crap happen and don't necessarily need to put it in order. So my point is, you could have, if I go back to the chart, INFPs, INTPs, ENTPs, the NPs are people that are going to generate a lot of ideas organically. Now the E in the room absolutely helps kind of put some of that social energy in the room, kind of cranks it up a notch or two. So absolutely helpful. And if you're going to putting a brainstorming session together, the INFPs are thinking the same way. They just might not be. They're the types that have 20 ideas, just as many as the ENTP has, but they're not speaking up. An ENTP in class, like in school, is the type of person that every time an idea popped into their head, they wanted to share it with the class. And all the INTPs in the room said, well, I had the same idea. I'm just not a loudmouth and opening and raising my hand and throwing it out there. So you see the difference in what the E is driving? So what I'm trying to get at is a little more fidelity as we kind of dial in. That shows how old I am. I'm actually dialing something in with an analog. I guess that's cool though, right? I mean, that's cool now. All the way back around. Yeah? Nice. So let's go this way and let's talk about what some of the negatives are if we got a team that's full of a bunch of extroverts.
Okay. They might have poor listening skills. Too many cooks in the kitchen if everybody's extroverted. It's kind of the saying. And/or we have lots of conflict too. If you have same people that are all the same, you get a lot of people trying to be a cook.
Exactly. Spot on. Good. Negatives.
Lack of reflection, rushing, distraction, burnout, non-finishers, talking over others, lack of filter, oversell, underdeliver.
Okay. And again, some of those things that you were starting to weave in there aren't necessarily tied to the downside of extroversion. It's the other stuff that you're usually associating with extroverts, and that's like the P versus J. Because you could have a bunch of extroverted Js, they're going to get a lot of crap done. Because that J is driving order and getting stuff done. But spot on with just about everything. Good.
Weird that you miss out on ideas that introverts and more quiet folks have. That might be a significant negative. And also that, you can get off track with Mission Creek because there's so much agreement and so much energy that you might not be really focused, stay as focused.
Spot on. Before we do that, has anyone, we're in a small company, does software, leadership development and stuff. From a volume standpoint, the ENTP types generate a lot of ideas. But like the INFPs, the ISTJs, when they come up with something, it is a doozy. It is like to your point, when it was like it's something that people weren't thinking about. And they were quiet enough and had stepped back long enough and were thoughtful enough about it that they came up with an idea that was just, holy tamale, we did not think of it that way. That is a brilliant idea. And if you don't give them space and time and a platform to kind of think that through, you're right, they can kind of be run over, steamrolled. So good stuff.
Yeah, we had the same thing. Too many ideas with little reflection. Potentially, they could monopolize the conversation, which leads into sort of overbearing and not good listeners. Easily sidetracked.
Okay. So in general, if you wanted to form a team to get something done, do you want all E's, all I's, or balance?
It depends on the pace you're working at, but sometimes the I's need the E's to like keep them going, like keep them excited and keep them going. Like, yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think so. I think in general balance is good. You can kind of skew things. I mean, if you go into the product development, software development environment at Apple versus IBM, probably a little bit different mix, right? Let's flip that page over and let's do the next dichotomy. And now that you're kind of getting in a rhythm, I think we gave you close to 10 minutes. We're going to do 5 minutes on this one. Where am I here? So the next one is sensing versus intuition. So again, yeah.
This is the intuition side of me that wants to ask this question. So I feel like all of the traits are regulators on the other traits. And so to parcel out one particular, are you an E or an I, and what's good or what's bad about that, I feel like it's super hard to have a realistic perspective on that if you're not taking into account the other 3 traits that are part of that personality. So, I mean, to say, let's just talk about one component, it doesn't matter if you're an E or an I if you've got other components that are regulating that.
I think you're spot on. And you're struggling with it because you're an N.
Yeah.
And if someone was an S, they're like, no problem, I'll analyze it. So I think it's perfect. I think he's spot on with, and it's complex, right? I mean, all these things interact with each other.
Right.
But I'm still going to force you to do it in a linear fashion.
Great point.
So good try though. But no, you're spot on. So let's do the strengths and the challenges of a team, or you can even think of it as a 2-person team, right? Is everyone familiar with the Google concept of small team formation? Is anyone familiar with that? So their theory is that the most productive work that can be done, the highest output, are teams of 2, maybe teams of 3. They put small teams on big things and say, go get it. But it's remarkable that they do things that way in such a large company. But they start with a big one and they have a team that'll tackle it at the high level. They'll break that down into 5 different projects that really need to be attacked, and they'll put teams of 2 people on those, and that's how they kind of break it down. So it's okay. So I guess my point is on this exercise, if it's helpful, think about what the benefits of 2 people that are sensing might have working together versus 2 people versus the downside, the strengths of sensing versus intuition. My point is you can think of it in a team, you can think of it in a didactic two-person situation.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Based on what we know, what can we make out of this?
Right.
How can we make information out of the data?
You're probably not done, but I'm going to truncate it a bit. Let's take this a bit more free-flowing. What were some of the strengths when you look at a team that's full of intuition? Throw it out. You're on sensing? Okay, sensing.
Well, for
Throw it
strong
out.
intuition, probably leveraging a lot of resources. I see strong ends as being connectors. If there's a project, not only are we looking at what can we do with the tools we have right here, but how can we leverage other people in other directions to push the project forward.
Okay, good. On the sensing side? Yeah.
Digest all the information.
Yeah. They let it come at them, right? And so they have a tendency to be a bit more thorough in analyzing, especially if they have the J on the backside as well. So whether it's an EN, or an ISTJ or an ESFJ, you know, that S and that J really allows people to kind of step back and allow all the data to come in, analyze it, and then do something with it. Whereas you know, I'm an N, and I get myself in trouble all the time. I'll read like the first line in an email preview in Outlook, and see the first sentence that says, "I can't make the meeting." So I'm like, "Oh, sweet, meeting's off. I got time." I don't read underneath it that says, "But however, I'm meeting with the CEO and I need data on this, this, and this, and this," and I've kind of missed the entire boat. Whereas an S would never do that. An S would click on it, read the email, and most likely would get the full data. Good. Any other?
To the point where you barely do spaces between your paragraphs because you watch out for people like that miss the bottom.
That's right.
So they write differently.
That's right. Proactive.
That's right.
Changing the.
I'm ESFJ. So.
Yeah, changing the world one email at a time. Any other strengths and challenges that this room is full of ends? What are going to be some of the potential blind spots of everybody being on, for the most part, being on the end side in here?
Challenge is, as an N, you just know where you're going. You don't exactly know how to explain why you're going there. And I think if S's are looking for the explanation of like, oh, well, you're supposed to do, you need to tell me that you're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. I'm just going to be like, well, I'm going to get to E, but I can't tell you how I'm going to get there. I don't know.
That's spot on.
Similar. We wrote that you jump and you skip when you're intuitive because you're going, I don't know if it's more quickly, but you're just leaping off of it from idea to another, and sometimes it might be difficult to really have that thoughtful thread or following what was the path, especially when you reflect on what we're trying to do here,
What do you
which is
think,
create this journey, and we want to make sure we don't skip. And you mentioned about
yeah, just as far as passing down knowledge, because like we're supposed to be making a curriculum, but if there's a lot of intuitive thinking, it's kind of hard for like an intuitive person like me to pass on knowledge, because I'll take it as that I know it, but I won't necessarily be able to explain it or write it down, which...
Imagine a world of a bunch of N's in the room, like as you were just describing, and you're an S, and you're going to try to work with you guys. You're either going to be the most valuable player, and everyone's going to want you on their team, but what you just talked about is perfect, right? Because now if an N's teaching another N, maybe they can kind of jump around with you, and it's kind of just experiential storytelling type learning. But if you're trying to teach that to, especially again, the S and the J together, and someone wants to know, I want to know how to go from A, then to B, then to C, and you start talking about what E looks like. Oh, and by the way, C sometimes impacts E, and depending on if you go to A first or skip over that, I mean, the S's start sweating. They start freaking out. I was sharing a story over here that in our world, we had 2 ENTPs leading ThinkWise. And every time we'd come up with an idea, an ENTP wants to talk it out. I got this great idea, I just want to talk it out, you know. But what that sounded like, because we were leaders in the organization, to the people that were the doers, the software developers, and the lead guy was an ISTJ, he honestly would go home and have anxiety attacks because he just thought that like 5 new products were invented. And he knew, even though we kept saying, but I'm not going to have you do it, you know, I just want to talk it through, he kept thinking, and he could not sleep. He would think, if Dan and Roger want me to do this, this, and this, I'm going to have to figure out how to change this, and there's integration here, and they haven't thought about the impact on the other modules, and it was a nightmare. So what do you think, what did we do? What should we have done? How would I fix that?
Ask.
Keep them shut up a little bit? Well, I did one thing. We got rid of one of the ENTPs.
Keep them focused, give them space, buffer.
You're spot on. I mean, all this stuff that's kind of intuitively that you're coming up with, he needed to get away, so we gave him space, private office, so he could stay heads down, and he didn't have to overhear all the ideating that was going on. That was one thing. We had to be more thoughtful and planful than when we were going to talk about an idea. Right up front, we gave the caveat, just brainstorming. This is me. This is me as an ENTP. Chuck brought up a great point. I'd like you to make it now that, I'll just let you make the point.
Maybe one of the most critical things in the dynamics of collaborative teams is the whole aspect of just getting to know first yourself and what you are, what your strengths are, and then being incredibly transparent with everybody else on the team in terms of who you are. I am an in, and I have to constantly say to everybody, and I've learned to say this now in team dynamics, I'm speaking out loud, it's just my idea, and I'm not worrying about a plan and execution right now. I'm just sharing with you openly an idea, because I can ideate forever and nothing would get done. But the key is to be able to feel comfortable within yourself. The better you feel about yourself, the easier it is to be transparent with each other. And the more other people know who you are and how you think, they can then help shore up your weaknesses. And that's the other side of it. Ultimately, you have to be ready to say, this is who I am. I don't do that really well. Hey, everybody, I need your help.
Does that make sense? Right. So a lot of this is really just that deeper understanding. We're all intelligent, driven, motivated people. So once we start understanding ourselves more and others, only good things can come out of it. So it's a process. We have a half an hour left. I'm going to skip over a little bit here because the next exercise that we're going to give you is thinking through all 4 dichotomies here. And we're going to actually, is everybody comfortable sharing their type? If so, I think it would be useful, because I think what John would like you to do is, and again, I'll just reiterate, there was this idea that we were going to have a really nice balanced sprinkling of people and eyes, and John had, like a mad scientist, like a designer. He was going to I'm going to throw these people together, and there's going to be too many N's, and then I'm going to throw the T's and this and that. We don't have enough. Meaning we don't have enough diversity. It's like you're all N's, except for one poor soul. A lot of P's, a little bit more mix on the other 2. But essentially, I think we talked earlier, and I think part of what what we're trying to do here is give you enough to chew on, enough fidelity that you can actually be design-minded and put together your teams for the next phase of the program. Right?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly how to do this, so I'm leaning on you heavily here, about how to self-select into teams. You know, we're going to have basically 4 teams, 4 people on each team. One of them I think will have 5. 2 people who are not here, John O'Neill and Eric Luffam, very much want to be part of this. They're out of town right now, so they will be joining a team. So I don't know how to go about self-selecting. I was into the mad scientist routine. So,
what if we tried this? What if I'm going to give you some new paper? How many teams do we want to form? 4 or 5?
I think 4. I really don't want to have too many on a team. 4 people on a team, to me, is about maximum. One might have to have 5, but I don't think we need 5 teams.
Okay, so we're going to do 4 pieces of paper. What might be interesting is just to keep in mind what you would consider normal design aspects of building a team. You don't want to be in the same company, right? You want to kind of sprinkle in some diverse views. Even without knowing type yet, it might be interesting to try to form the first groups of 4 that kind of seem reasonable to you. And then on the piece of paper, write down your types and say, I'd like you to examine it and look at the 4 types and look at each other and say, is this going to be a challenge? Is this right? Do we have to shift around a little bit? And I think John and I will walk around and maybe challenge and see what we're seeing on the piece of paper. Yeah, Gwen.
When you first started, didn't you say, or maybe I misheard, not to judge the people on their type for a job? Isn't that what we're trying to do? Or am I missing something?
I did. It's a.
I mean, because, for example, I'm right between an E and an I.
Okay.
I'm right in there.
Yep.
So I tested and passed as an I, this time it was an E, but it was right at that center point.
Sure.
And I think people who know me here see that sometimes I am reserved and sometimes I'm not. So to be judged on a team or whatever about that, I don't even begin to know how to judge that.
Well, we don't. I think what was interesting is we don't even know. I mean, the best team in here might be a team of 4 INFPs. So we don't. What we're saying is we're not judging quality. We're not judging how smart the team is. We're not judging whether or not they're going to do good output. What we want to do, though, is we want to design teams that we think have the best chance of functioning well together, right? So I'm backpedaling a little bit, Frank, but what I was saying earlier is the Myers-Briggs they will never sell it to you to use it for determining who you should hire. Now, there's plenty of other personality instruments that are used for that. If I was going to hire for an outside sales rep that's going after new opportunities, am I going to hire, for the most part, an introvert or an extrovert? An extrovert, right? If I'm going to hire somebody that's a software developer that I need to absolutely crank, this isn't a team lead, it's somebody that I need to crank code, and I had my druthers, what personality type, if I had to pick from a pool of just knowing personality type, the Myers-Briggs, what would I pick? An I, S, maybe even a J at the end, right? So it's helpful in understanding how people are pre-wired and what they're comfortable doing. The biggest point that I tried to make throughout all the early slides is that doesn't necessarily mean how we see people and how they exhibit in the real world. Because I've used my left arm so much, I'm really good at it. For you to judge me on saying that I'm right-handed is really unfair. It's really, I think, what you're getting at, right, Gwen? So,
Catherine. I understand your reservation on that. I would say something that helps me with this is, and Paul and I use this with our teams, and is that it's not necessarily how I'm going to judge you, but how I can judge myself within the team and how I might help support you within the team, so I know what my
weaknesses are, I guess, but not what yours are, right? So I know where I need help at. So when I'm in the team, I can sort of figure out my place, but not figure out what your place is, I guess. Does that make sense?
It's really, I mean, it's absolutely going to be fascinating. Since Catherine and I have worked together for a number of years, I think of Meg Wheatley in a self-organizing system, you know. That's really sort of what I'm asking to happen here, and I don't know how to go about it. It's not a popularity contest. It's not who do you want to be with who. I do think, I guess I want some confirmation on that, I do think it's best if people who work together at their businesses on a daily basis probably not be on the same team. I don't think it'll be as much of a good experience if they do. I'm, of the people that I know who work together, I think I'm getting pretty much head shaking that, okay. So with that caveat, I'm sort of.
That may be the only.
Oh, well, that's probably true. That is the only caveat. Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
Because it's the dynamics of teams at the end of it, and I'm speaking out loud, so I
Please.
apologize. But at the end of the day, the world throws all of us together, doesn't it? And we come together in teams. I wish every time we had the ability to pick them all the time. My guess is life has proven to all of us that that's not always the best thing. The diversity of teams really becomes incredibly important. What's really important, though, is understanding that my strength and Catherine's strengths may be identically the same in some areas, but quite different in other areas. And so when I'm weak, she's strong and vice versa. So the more we know that, the more we understand that in the dynamics of a team, and if we're all highly extroverted and intuitive, we'll also have to be able to look at each other and say, guess what? When it comes to planning time, we are going to need help, right? Because so many times we try not to deal with that, and what we should be doing is we need some of Derek's skills really bad right now, right? And we don't possess them, and it's hard, especially in the business world, to raise your hand and say, I don't have those skills. So you got to be willing, I think, in the dynamics of these teams to say, hey, here's who we are, here are our strengths, and by the way, there's going to come time when we need some of our weaknesses offset by strengths that we're going to have to go figure out how to either get or exercise that part of our being in a stronger way.
Adam, you had?
Also looking at our spread, it was 16P to 3J. So I'm curious if the majority would be okay with saying, I don't really care. Like, I'm going to respond to whatever group that I get put in.
Well, I'm feeling the potential of being the benevolent dictator. Because as I look around the room, you're already in sort of interesting groups. And the only group that I see that has two people who work together is this one. So I might move you over there, all right? And then I would add John O'Neill in, and I would add Eric. Eric cannot be there, but John could be onto your team. And probably put Eric with you all. And Alan he's teaching a class tonight, so he had to leave. He may be the fifth man out, and I'll sort of have to think about that. But how do you feel about that?
I think we have a great team.
Does that work?
I like that because I like chance. I like the element of
Chance?
serendipity and chance as well to play a role in this.
All right.
Because
Then let's do
you
this.
have to then understand what our strengths are to say what we don't have. And I think
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
the whole point of it.
One for everybody. Okay, you got to move. You're over there.
Yeah, we're just that's what we're
Good job, John. That was good.
Yes, you're being welcomed. You know, that's nice.
So then let's, that gives us a little more time. What I think would be interesting is simply, and you don't even have to put a name next to it, but write down the 4 types that
That would be
constitute the team
That
and
would be-
start a conversation. Huh? Well, ultimately, John has to know what the teams are. But my point is for the exercise of what we're trying to do. We don't have to have the names.
What you're getting is what the assignment is. And I want you to be able to look at it as a team, think about it. If you've got questions now, great. The big thing you have to figure out is how you as a team are going to communicate and meet and be able to meet the assignment of making the presentation of what you have thought up, which will be June 3rd. We're not going to meet again until then. I will assign, and I'll do this a little bit later by email, I will assign a mentor to the different teams, and I will let you know. So I'm going to make sure I capture who's on what team. Answer some questions, but talk a little bit, because there obviously needs to be some clarity on the assignment, and I want to make sure in the next 10 minutes we get that fairly clear. We can start with the question, Catherine. Oh, the fourth person on your team is Eric Lofum, and he is an INTP. Let me clarify this. What you're being asked to do is to develop the content of each of the 6 sessions for the next 6 sessions out of what your interests are as a team. I want to know more about this. This is something I wish I had exposure to. I'd like to have this knowledge. You know, and learned outcomes just mean what you're expected to learn after the end of each session. So you identify what you expect to be knowing and able to use after each session. That's a learned outcome. Okay? Think of it as objective. What those are they related? Are they not? Do you see them in a sequence or not? Is entirely up to the team. When we get to June 3rd and you each as a team present what you are proposing, there will be a selection out of that will be what are the next 6. And we will talk about that. So there may or may not be some similarities. I certainly can't expect that everybody is going to come up with the same thing. So part of the benefit of the team, and that was the expectation of a different mix, was that we'd really even have a broader selection. So we may end up with 15 things. You know, we will then narrow that down to 6. And you see that there is more room at the end, so we can do some more things there. But that's the assignment. And I only put down some possible menu of learning experiences because that's what I want it to be, just possible. I don't want you to think of a class with a lecture. I don't want you to think of repetitive times. You know, maybe there is a 2-day experience and we go somewhere as a group. I don't know. I mean, it's very possible that could happen. So I don't want to limit it at all, and those are starting points, not ending points. So I truly want you to be thinking about what do I want to learn? And you had some of this early on when we first met. And what are the things that I want to get out of that experience, and what's the kind of experience I want to have? So this is truly, this is the open book. Did that help? Confuse? Yes. Thank you. Very important point. Very important. You are creating the curriculum that will be passed on to the next generation. And
that may be one of the most important aspects of it.
Yeah. Yeah, truly.
You get a chance to create that curriculum for the future, which is pretty awesome.
And I want it to come out of your interests, your needs, what you're after.
So do we have to have knowledge about what a curriculum is?
No, not at all. No. And I'll let the dean speak to that too. But no, you do not. Don't. No.
So I shouldn't Google how to create curriculum?
No.
Okay.
No. And I've told you, one second. I'm going to repeat the story to sort of make Laurel's point. Because when Rosen first started talking to me about putting this together, I did exactly that. I went out and Googled and what's a master's degree look like and what's involved and all that, and put some ideas and sent it off to him. And he very quickly said to me, way too organized, you know. And I'm an ENTJ, so that didn't feel very organized to me. So what what I got very excited about, and hopefully you get excited about, is the fact that no, that's not the starting point. If we start with that, we're not accomplishing anything that's moving it forward. So it's very much an open, what is the kind of experience. It's also why we're not worried about how many hours in a classroom. We're interested in what you're learning and how to demonstrate that learning. Right? So thanks for that question, because that's an important thing. This has, and we tried, this has no comparative example.
It may be that you end up with 6 big themes. Maybe you end up with 8 big themes, and 2 of them don't survive, right? Or you get 6 and all of a sudden it triggers another thought, and then the 7th one is born. That's fine, right? It's about so a big theme, and then the question would be is what elements or components might you put into that will give it meaning, give it touch points in terms of what would I see, what would I touch, what would I hear, what would I feel, what would I experience that would validate that bigger theme, right? Don't worry about curriculum stuff. You've got to, I'm a curriculum weenie, right? I can make anything into a curriculum, pumpkin carving included. We don't care, right? What's important is that what you go from a position of what and why, and then we'll figure out how, and we'll ask the end question that we're going to ask of all of you is how do you make meaning of those things, right? Why is it significant or important to you? Because then it really is something you can hand down, right? It's something you can hand off, and it may evolve with the next group of people. If our demographics skew the other way, they may find one of your 6 to be the most useless thing they've ever seen in their lives. Well, we would have a way to acknowledge that, right? And we would say, what would be the alternative? and we can start, sorting and selecting. So think big, think what it is that you big theme pieces, and then let us worry about gluing the other parts together.
Okay. And again, as a team, and I'll make sure Eric knows he's on your team and connect by email, and John with you all. It's up to you how you want to get together, when you want to get together, how you want to work. You decide that. And I will also, sometime this week, will identify which mentor is going to go with which group. And the mentors.
Like exotic meals.
Yes, they do. They do.
Nice house.
They can be bought, all sorts of things like that. Yeah. And
A weekend at a cottage. Sessions at the beach.
boy, yeah, sure. Of course.
About the users of this information in the future.
Yep.
So that next generation.
Yeah.
So let's say it's now 2 or 3 cohorts or units or whatever of this has graduated. So what's that? 6 years from now or something like that. Would you say that the people who come and were drawn to Kendall and the idea of this program that you're trying to create are, because, I can see some similarities of some of the people in the room here, and then there's some outliers and people have different experiences.
Yeah.
Do you foresee success? Do you define success for yourself when you think about it, when you've perhaps talked about this with David, to be that this Masters of Design degree will attract people from all walks of life, or, and I'm giving you some examples now, primarily have some kind of a design or creative degree or writing or something, and they find themselves drawn towards the design profession, so they feel that this is the terminal degree in their area for them to accomplish anything. Who would have come through this project, this program, if you're thinking about it?
I have thought about that. And from the categories that you identified, I would say both and a few more. I would like anybody who has a sense of wanting to get better at pulling out of themselves those things that are I'm trying to find a way to avoid the word creative, but it is really what I mean. The ability to be more creative in what they do, how they do it, who they do it with, leader, not leader, good followers, whatever. To be able to apply a creative sense and make a difference in what they do. So I don't think that has any particular starting point.
So a person could come into this program and participate who is in middle management in a manufacturing company because
Absolutely.
they want to understand how to work with designers better, or someone could come to
Yes.
this who's really a creative designer who wants to think more broadly about design in other facets.
Yes, and even an accountant could come to this. Yeah, so it's, yeah, I don't see it as a limit. I think the only limit would be a sense of spirit of wanting to grow.
And because it's evolutionary, what you create now becomes the platform on which we build that other diversity, right? So
Yeah,
it's-
it always needs to be an iterative process.
Right.
It's going to change every time there's a
yes,
class, a little
come
bit.
back in 5 years and you may or may not recognize
Yeah.
the activity. You will clearly identify with the learning.
Good question. Are there any more? Questions?
Yeah, how do we pick our mentors?
You don't.
Call dibs?
I do. I'll pick your mentor.
I want to call Chuck.
You-
Yeah, that's why I asked if I.
Benevolent czar.
Yeah, I've got to think that through. I've been doing that sitting here, and I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Frozen in here, Max. We need to gang up here.
Yeah, that's true. It's 7:30, folks, and you're probably mostly hungry because I only gave you snacks. There may be questions that come back and forth. Please send them off. I'll get back to you, and I will also. I can email this assignment to you if you want to make it a little bit easier. Yeah, I do intend to do that to all of you. And what I would suggest you have each other's emails by those massive ones that I send out, but you also should just make sure that you know how to get in touch with each other as a team. Okay? I think I do. Yeah, pretty sure I do. Okay. If that's it, you're welcome to stay as teams and do whatever you want. But we're adjourned. No, I'm not going to throw them out.